a protein there's several different DNAs that can encode the same protein. So evolution would predict that if you looked at the DNA, even though all organisms, from plants to mammals and everything in between, has almost identical histone H3, you would predict that when you look at the DNA and the similarities in the genes of the histone H3 gene, you would come up with a family tree like the ones I showed you before, and that is what we find. If those were all created, you would predict that one of two things should happen. Either the creator would, if the proteins are all the same, why wouldn't the creator make all the DNAs the same? Well, might just choose the codons from the genetic code to use at random, and then there would be no relationship between the DNAs at all. Or they might be chosen so that the same DNA was used in all cases. But you certainly would not predict the pattern that's actually seen. And that, to me, I mean, I never formally studied evolution, but I started out as a biochemist and learning about these proteins. And that sort of thing, to me, is so convincing of common ancestry that it wouldn't matter if there were fossils or not.
Okay, Dr. Paulson.
Okay.
We just got 5 minutes left, and that would give your opportunity for a question to Dr. Hovind.
Okay, I guess I'd like to pin Dr. Hovind down one more time on the idea of what predictions his hypothesis makes. And I'd like him to share with us one prediction that the hypothesis of creation makes, hypothesis of creationism 6,000 years ago and all that. One prediction that would distinguish it from evolution, one case where it makes a different prediction, and secondly, a prediction by which it could conceivably be falsified.
Well, you kind of did what that other guy did. You asked about 5 questions. Just give me one. Narrow that down to one for me. Can you try it one more time? Because I've only got 5 minutes to answer this. Pick one. Which one do you like the worst?
Just show me a prediction that distinguishes creationism from evolution.
Creation predicts that animals will bring forth after their kind. And if you look around the world in all the breeding experiments and accidents, that's all we're seeing, is this bringing forth after their kind. I gave you my predictions. There's going to be animals that produce after their kind and plants that produce after their kind. There will be no intermediates between basic kinds. I gave you a definition of kind, capable of reproducing. Your definition of species was interesting, that is similar to my definition of kind, animals capable of reproducing, and yet a dog and a wolf are different species. But they can interbreed, you know, so you don't have a good definition of species, I don't think either. And again, we're arguing back to between micro and macro. Where's the border line? That's what the whole argument is about here. Where's the line between micro and macro evolution? I don't know exactly the definition of all the kinds, but I think the vast majority are pretty obvious, and a 3-year-old can tell you that a banana and a dog are a different kind of animal. So my prediction would be that animals would only be observed to bring forth after their kind, and that fossils we would find would be similar to living fossils today, living animals today, or plants, and that there will be no evidence whatsoever in the living world or in the dead world of anything in between basic kinds of animals. That's what I predict based upon the creation model, and we have yet to see any evidence to the contrary of that. I predict, for one thing, fossils don't form very readily. Millions of buffalo were slaughtered out west in the last few hundred years. I defy you to go find one fossilized buffalo. The existence of fossils, period, is very good evidence of a flood. Soft-bodied animals like worms and jellyfish are found fossilized. Had to be buried instantly. They'd have been decayed or scavenged in a few, in a few moments down in the ocean, in the real world. So the existence of fossils in twisted, contorted positions and disarticulated fossils where they rotted for a few months and then were finally buried in giant piles of bones. We covered that in video number 6 of my series about all the fossil graveyards, are such powerful proof for a flood. So I gave you my predictions that we'll find animals that only produce after their kind in the living, and we won't find fossils of anything in between. And we'll find zillions of fossils buried in the ground. As far as something that would falsify that, well, then the opposite. If we don't find any fossils buried in the ground, then probably that's good evidence there wasn't a flood. If we find animals regularly producing different kinds other than themselves, wildly different kinds that are also capable of reproducing, that would be good evidence. That would falsify the creation theory. And yet I'd like to see those. There is none of that. There's no evidence for that.
All right. If each of you would like to make a closing statement, a brief closing statement on your behalf, we would take those now.
How long will that be? 2 minutes?
We won't time you.
Long
I'll
as you
keep it somewhat brief.
Well, in that case, I'm glad I'm going first. Well, I would just like to reply to the question, the answer, rather, to my question that Dr. Hovind just gave. I understood him to say that his hypothesis of creationism predicts that all the fossils in the ground would be the same as fossils that are alive today. That sounded like what he said. He certainly said something about there not being any transitional fossils between the groups that are alive today. And when he tells you that there aren't, he is quite simply ignoring lots of paleontological work and lots of fossils that have been discovered. They're out there, and the thing that makes evolution science, one of the things that makes evolution science is that when people make claims, other people can check them out. Those fossils are there in museums and laboratories, so people can check them for themselves. And they are some that are clearly transitional. So that would tend to disprove creationism, if that's a really firm prediction of it, that those shouldn't exist. He also says that creationism predicts that there should be zillions of fossils. Well, he hasn't answered my point about there being too many fossils. There's one rock formation, I believe it's called the Kalu Formation in Africa, which is by test drillings and so forth, has been estimated to contain 800 billion fossils of animals, average size of a fox. Now, you can calculate out that even if the entire Earth was land, there would still be 7 of those creatures per acre. And that's just from one rock formation in Africa. If one examines all these things that creationists say, all the fossils forming in the flood and so forth, and follows them to their logical conclusion, which they don't, you come to lots of absurdities. And that, to my mind, shows that it is not possibly a hypothesis that can be true. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Paulson, for coming. I will have to say it is very difficult to find opponents for debates on this topic. The majority of evolutionists seem to want to stand in front of their freshman students where they have the academic and psychological advantage, and they don't want to seem to defend their faith. Last week I was in Menominee, Wisconsin, and they asked 200 professors to come debate. They got 0 takers out of 200 that were invited to the debate. The week before that, I had a debate in Minnesota, and they asked, probably 100. 2 said they would do it if there could be 2 against 1. It is really hard to find opponents for this subject, and yet I think it's a vitally important subject. I think students need to see both sides. The point is, both creation and evolution are religious. You have to take one or the other on faith. The Bible says pretty clearly, the invisible things of Him, talking about the Creator, from the creation of the world are clearly seen.
A protein there's several different DNAs that can encode the same protein. So evolution would predict that if you looked at the DNA, even if those were all created, you would predict that one of two things should happen. Either the creator would, if the proteins, all organisms, from plants to mammals and everything in between, has almost identical histone H3, you would predict that when you look at the DNA and the similarities in the genes of the histone H3 are all the same, why wouldn't the creator make all the DNAs the same? Well, might just choose the codons from the genetic code to use at random, and then there would be no relationship between the three genes. You would come up with a family tree like the ones I showed you before, and that is what we find.